We are Hardwick Clinical Commissioning Group and, together with other local health, social care and voluntary organisations, we are responsible for the healthcare of over 100,000 people in North East Derbyshire. All organisations are talking about how, with falling budgets and rising need, we no longer have the luxury of working separately to do our own thing. We all agree that in some way we have to pool our efforts and coordinate the services we offer. We'd like to take you through a patient story to demonstrate our vision about how care could be delivered for our patients. We'll start with Mr. Green, a real patient, although not his real name, who lives in Tibshelf. He lives by himself and has dementia. Mr. Green suffers from recurring urinary tract infections for which he is treated by his GP practice. Mr. Green's GP practice is part of an integrated team which includes a social care worker, district nurses, practice nurses, a community matron, a care coordinator and a GP. This team works together to care for patients who have more than one health problem and are often elderly and quite frail. The team work like a ward in a hospital, but instead of using beds there, they aim to keep people in their own beds, in their own homes, wherever possible. This is called a virtual ward. The team are pulled together by a care coordinator who acts like the ward clerk in a hospital. Mr. Green is on the virtual ward and at the centre of this team. A carer visits him twice a day, the community matron visits him regularly, the GP and district nurses offer support, and the care coordinator tracks his progress. But the team can't do everything. One morning recently, when the care worker visited Mr. Green, he refused to get out of bed. He didn't feel well and seemed more disorientated than usual. The carer rang the community matron, who went out to see him. She spoke to the GP, and they decided to move him to a social care bed in the community so that he could be safe whilst they watched and waited. There was a bed for Mr. Green, but the local team running the service didn't have enough staff to care for him. With time ticking, the GP had no alternative but to send Mr. Green to the hospital. The hospital team watched Mr. Green. He didn't need any treatment. 6 days later he felt better, and the hospital discharged him back to the care of the virtual ward, writing on his records that he came into hospital because there was no social care. He came back to his own home, but he could easily have been discharged to a care home. 40% of people in nursing homes arrive straight from hospital and stay there. If this happens again, perhaps Mr. Green will be sent to a care home rather than back to his own home. And all this is costing us. Frail and elderly people going into hospital in an unplanned way cost Hardwick CCG over £14 million per year, and the figure is rising. If we were to stop just 1 in 10 of these unplanned admissions, we could save nearly £1.5 million. Often the frustrating thing is that there is care based out near people's homes, but it doesn't link up. For example, we have beds, intermediate care beds and short stay beds and reablement beds, beds in community hospitals and beds in care homes. We have occupational therapists that work for community services, occupational therapists that work for social services, and occupational therapists that work for the Mental Health Trust. We have rapid response teams and intermediate care teams. We have physiotherapists and we have nurses. We have a service for people who fall, a service for people who have a stroke, and a service for people who have problems with their memory. We have specialist nurses for people who have respiratory problems, for people with heart failure, for people with Parkinson's, for people with neurological conditions, and specialist nurses for people who are dying. We have daycare services, we have night sitting services, we have social services and voluntary services. We even have a single telephone line to access all these services, but still they don't always link up. Sometimes the team can't take the patient because they're not there at the right time. Sometimes they can't take them because they're too short-staffed that day, or because they don't quite fit the criteria for that team. Sometimes staff don't know they're there, or by the time they reach them it's too late. Or, most often, staff simply don't have the time to sort out all this different care in the community when it can all be sorted out with a single phone call to the hospital. Sometimes the GP knows what's wrong, and, as in Mr. Green's case, they just need a package of extra care to keep patients out of hospital. Sometimes they don't know, They may not need hospital, but they do need access to tests and diagnostics to understand what's happening and how best to treat. Unfortunately, at the moment, the only way to get those tests is to admit patients to hospital, where they can end up on the wards for days. So, how could it be better? Well, instead of lots of small services in the community, each with their own rules and criteria, run by separate organisations that bump up against each other and bump patients between them, what if we had a single, large team for the whole of Hardwick? And what if this team offered a complete, integrated care service? And this team had a single way of talking. And this team wasn't a health thing or a social services thing, but a joint thing, with money pulled from lots of organisations and pooled together with no transactions or tariff between them. And this team had all the advanced nurse practitioners, occupational therapists, physiotherapists, dementia nurses and mental health workers, social services, night sitters, voluntary groups and carers groups in one place. And what if this team ran the beds in health settings and social settings? And what if it included a consultant geriatrician who also worked at the local hospital? And what if, in the middle of the team, there was a call centre and staff who could coordinate services following a single phone call from a busy GP or professional, regardless of whether they need health or social care? And if they linked to a specialist nurse team at the Acute Trust, which could deliver intravenous antibiotics across the community? And they linked to the Falls Partnership Service, which travelled to people's own homes to pick them up and sort everything out to make sure they didn't fall again. And if staff weren't quite sure what was wrong, they could link to a specialist frail elderly unit at the local hospital for rapid assessment and diagnosis, and, where appropriate, immediate discharge back. So all the small teams integrate and form together in a hub. This is the Hardwick Integrated Care Hub. It gives us a responsive and resilient service. And this hub spokes out to other integrated care hubs in other communities, to specialist teams, to practices and virtual wards, to the frail elderly unit and to hospitals and acute services. These hubs and teams, linked together, form a network, and this network is strong enough to absorb pressure on any of its points and can shift focus as demand shifts. It can provide a service 24 hours a day and 7 days a week. When it's quiet at night, the hubs out in the community close, and staff and work shift across to the hub at the local hospital. And staff can rotate around the network between its points and be familiar with all that it can provide for patients. So now, thinking about Mr. Green, if the virtual ward team needs a little extra help for him, then they can make a call to the integrated care team, explaining the situation. A care coordinator takes over, leaving the GP to get on with her day. Within 2 hours, a community team visit. They admit to a bed managed and staffed within their team just for the night, and in the meantime, they work with colleagues in the same large team to sort out night sitting provided by volunteers and extra care visits from social services. They can link with specialist dementia nurses and work with the GP practice and its virtual ward to ensure that they have everything in place for the future. And if the GP isn't sure what's wrong, they can ask the consultant geriatrician. If they need tests, then they can refer up to the frail elderly unit for a rapid diagnosis. The geriatrician there can assess and diagnose quickly. If no hospital care is needed, then the integrated care team can take over. The team can arrange for IV antibiotics, night sitters, specialist nurses, extra carer visits and falls assessment. They can support carers and get patients back on their feet quickly. We have many of these services already, so to start off, Hardwick CCG is proposing to combine existing services to develop a single integrated care team, run together by all the agencies as a joint venture, with carer and patient involvement, with a combined budget and a single management and staff team, and an enhanced, mandatory, single point of contact for primary care. This one team will aim to provide a complete integrated care service for all our patients. We'll begin by asking the existing service providers to pool and link their services, merge protocols and develop shared information and management. We'll have a consultant geriatrician working for the acute trust to advise the team. The team may be jointly located or virtually linked, but they will be a single team. From there, we'll add to this hub wherever possible until health and social care staff have a complete local service and access through the network to more specialist providers when they need them. Our vision is for services as close as possible to patients, provided in the community by organisations integrated together around patients. A single, integrated care hub that is part of a network of hubs and of GP practices and of virtual wards and diagnostic services and specialist nurses and support teams. These organisations linked together don't just form a safety net that no one slips through. They form a trampoline that allows patients in Hardwick to bounce back.